Okay, now on to the idea of material deprivation and the financial rather than the cultural causes behind educational inequalities and outcomes. Then going on to look at cultural capital, which combines both material and cultural approaches. And lastly, looking at positional theory. There is a direct line between poverty and there's a direct link between poverty and educational outcomes. Good old Marcus Rashford here and the fantastic work he's doing in showing up this government for the shambles it is, sorry, did I say that? Or putting the issue of free school meals on the table. However, it's worth pointing out that those in recipient of free school meals are likely to get 33% are likely to get good GCSEs, that is a grade of the old standard C and above. And that there is a direct link also with those numbers who are at the same time not attending school, i.e. being truant from school, and also being excluded from school. So statistically, you're more likely to be excluded if you come from a poorer background. You're likely to do much worse in your academic studies. And also you are likely to live in an area where there is a poor school. 90% of failing schools come in socially deprived and economically downcast areas. Housing, if you end up like this guy working in a very small space, overcrowding plays its part. Overcrowding and a lack of safe space to work can limit what you can do. If you put on top of that the other problems with poor housing, damp, if you are from a parental background where employment is insecure, you are more likely to be temporarily in the house that you have, which means movement, and movement means changing schools and boroughs and making it harder. Health and welfare become quite difficult in that sense. There is a direct link also between poverty diet and educational outcomes, in the sense that those with poor diet, and that it has been proven to be the case, are more likely to suffer from ADHD and ADHD and attention deficit and behavioural and emotional problems than their counterparts. Poverty, clearly, material deprivation clearly has a part to play in explaining poor educational outcomes. You then go to the idea of poverty restricting. Poverty mean that you have to catch a couple of buses to school, or certainly not have the lift from daddy maybe that others will be party to. Your school uniform may be scruffier. This may lead to stigmatization and bullying as one of the poorer kids. Your access to reading material, computers, sport equipment, musical equipment. These are areas not only for additional expertise, but there are social areas to meet, social spaces to meet others and to build social networks. Also, without these elements, the idea of stigma and the following negative attributions of negative labeling by others follows. Similarly, if you come from a poorer background, you may experience the phenomenon of hand-me-down. So older brothers and sisters handing down pre-loved, as I think the phrase has it, uniform, etc. If you come from a poor background, it is extremely more likely that you would need something like a paper round to subsidise the money that you have for things. And this, again, will prejudice your ability to dedicate time to your studies. Those material things are on the one hand. A sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu, he's a French geezer, came up with a way of talking about cultural capital or cultural explanations and material explanations. Now, Basil Bernstein and those cultural theorists effectively blame the victim for their own set of circumstances in saying that they are the wrong cultural stuff for the school. Now, what Pierre Bourdieu does is reject that out of hand. It's not the fault of the working classes that they are not educationally stimulated and have the right kit, as it were, to get on. What Pierre Bourdieu talks about is the use of capital to exclude, to stop, to prevent, to raise a bar against working class kids. What Pierre Bourdieu says is that the site of the school is not class neutral, not cultural neutral. It is intensely biased towards the middle class. And so that it isn't a matter of not having the right cultural stuff, but being deprived deliberately access to higher cultural elements. And what Pierre Bourdieu means by this is, if you are the sort of guy that has parents who take you regularly to the museum, take you to see Shakespeare, not only does this cost money to do, which is unlikely, but inspirationally, you are more likely to be middle class in taking your children to these events. Part of this picture, part of this exclusion, because if you can attain these cultural attributes, that is being conversant in Shakespeare, talk about the plays and talk about the opera you've been to and all the rest of these kind of things, you will do more likely to open doors within school to be recognized, thinking of that kind of process of seeing themselves as middle class and doing well in that area. It also includes things like going to a private school, which is a way of buying cultural capital with money. What that does is allow you to be in an elite group of individuals who are favoured in the job market. This idea of the old school tie, opening doors, where you went to school being more important than the qualifications you got from being at school, is the boost, is the idea that you can exchange cultural capital for economic capital and vice versa, to the point of excluding working class and ethnic minorities, and to some extent those other excluded groups or disadvantaged groups. The last one is Raymond Bourdain's idea of positional theory. It's quite similar to cultural capital, but this suggests that the point that you are within the cultural or the social class structure is the point which you're going to hard to move from. And let me kind of spit this out and give you an example. If you come from a working class background, you are surrounded by working class culture. You are working class by build. You go to a middle class environment, such as a private school or a grammar school or a university. You don't fit in. You don't have the cultural wherewithal to fit in with the others in your group. So what happens is you feel excluded, you feel alienated, and this might explain the high dropout rate of working class kids from university, as well as why those back in the day who won scholarships to grammar schools from the working classes didn't always stay the course.